Thanks a lot and a warm welcome to our session today on sustainable consumption for biodiversity, unleashing the power of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was agreed end of 2022 in Montreal, on the targets 15 and the target 16. My name is Martina Fleckenstein. I'm with WWF International in our Global Food Program, leading on our policy work. This session is very important. We are on an important crossroad with only 6 years remaining until 2030. 6 years in which we need to raise ambition and accelerate implementation of the land, the biodiversity and the climate targets. And 2024 will be an important milestone, having all the 3 conference of the parties for all the 3 Rio Convention. And in this context, transformation of food system is crucial. And if we talk about food systems, we talk about the production on the ground, the supply chain, post-harvest loss, and the consumption. And that's the topic of our session today. We made already, and it makes me very optimistic, progress at the last climate COP in Dubai, where the leaders' declaration on sustainable agriculture, resilient food systems, and climate action was signed by today 159 member states. And this leaders' declaration is also calling out for shifting from a higher greenhouse gas emitted practices to more sustainable production and consumption approaches. The new Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the topic of today, opens a lot of potential to transform and shift to agriculture, to more sustainable agriculture and food systems. And we have the opportunity now. We are in this process to clarify the details of the targets, and the member states have been asked to submit their updated nationally biodiversity strategy and action plans, which is the implementation mechanism of the CBD, by COP16 in October. The topic today is focusing on target 15 and target 16. And for those who are not familiar, let me give you a short introduction in both targets. Target 15, it's one of 23 targets, by the way, is focusing on the role and impact of business on biodiversity, including, and I think that's also important, assessing and monitoring impacts of businesses on biodiversity, and asks very clear to develop legal and administrative policies, measures, and transparently disclosure risks and disclose risks. And target 16 is also asking the private sector to provide information to consumers on the impact of business practices on biodiversity. And this leads to target 16, which is asking to enable sustainable consumption choices by establishing supportive policies, legislation or regulatory framework, and I'm citing from the target right now, improving education and access to relevant and accurate information, and also to reduce the global footprint of consumption by 2030, including halving food loss and waste and reducing overconsumption. The event today is organized by the One Planet Network Consumer Information Program, which is led by the German Ministry of Agriculture, the Consumer International, and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, BioTrade. And this event is also co-organized by FSC, who is member of the program. The Consumer Information Program is a global network of government, private sector, civil society with over 100 members and a very active advisory board. It has a number of very strong work programs, just to mention the one on product lifetime extension, the one on sustainability information, one on promoting eco-labels to achieve sustainable consumption and production. And there is a working group on biodiversity and consumption. And the working group biodiversity and consumption is also leading on this event. To tell you more and to give you more insight on this working group, I want to ask Ana Karina Perez Pesa. She is head of strategy by FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council. Ana Karina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martina, for the introduction. Together with Ivana Padierna from UNTACT, we are the co-leads of the Working Group on Biodiversity and Consumption. And yeah, welcome to this side event. The Working Group, Martina, you also referred to briefly, is part of the Consumers Information Program from the One Planet Network and was created in 2020 with members from a myriad of organizations, including UN bodies, governments, and civil society organizations. In its first phase, the group focused on communication and biodiversity communication and awareness raising, having developed key outputs such as a communication toolkit with assets, including infographic and briefs. And these resources have been endorsed to deliver, or officially recognized as resources to deliver on Target 16 as part of our engagement efforts to engage at the COP15 in Montreal. Now we have started a new phase and we are working as a collaboration network to support the achievements of Targets 15 and 16 that you have explained from the Global Biodiversity Framework. And our role is to provide guidance, advice, and incubate initiatives led by members and different stakeholders. This side event is one of the first initiatives we are organizing in this new phase, and we are really looking forward to hearing from the speakers in the discussions and take this further to explore the role of sustainable consumption in mitigating the impact of human activities on biodiversity and ecosystem services, as we also actively promote actions aimed at their protection and enhancement. Thank you to all the speakers and partners for making this event possible. And thank you to all the participants for joining. Enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Karina, for pointing out the important work you do in the working group on biodiversity and consumption. Just to mention, we are here at UNIA and we also want to strengthen our approaches to integrate food system in the recommendations which are discussed here. This is done also with support of the Sustainable Food System Program, which is one of the 6 programs under the umbrella of the One Planet Network. So, but there is still a lot of room to engage the member states more on this topic. We have developed, or we have split this session in 2 parts or in 3 parts. We will start with a so-called fire starter, which I will have with Sheila Agarwal Khan. She's the Director of Industry and Economy at UN Environmental Program, followed by a panel discussion, and we have time for questions from the participants in this session. Let me start with you, Sheila. In your role, we heard about that the degradation of natural habitats accelerates at an alarming rate. And 70% of biodiversity loss is due to unsustainable agriculture and food production. Now we have Target 15 and Target 16, which are all asking for supportive policies, for legislative, regulatory frameworks, more transparency, and in particular, better information for consumers. My question is, what does it mean for government, for the private sector, for consumers? How can the principles embodied in the Global Biodiversity Framework targets serve as a catalyst for redefining the paradigms of consumption towards a model that not only safeguards biodiversity, but also underpins the foundation of a sustainable future? Hopefully not a too complicated question, but it's very, as you say, it's a very exciting moment where we are. Over to you.
Thanks, Martina. I would say that now we're at a time where, you know, let me just back up a bit. All businesses rely on biodiversity. And so now is the time when you think, well, how do you run a business if you're going to drive yourself into the ground? Because at the end of the day, you have consumers looking at seeing what kind of products they have. You have governments who want to have sustainability and be able to, and you have a business which has to run over a long period of time. So it's a time of systemic change where managing and conserving biodiversity is critical to your business model. And so we're seeing these targets established by governments to basically look and see, okay, are businesses sustainable? Are they disclosing enough and having a transparent system so that consumers can have the information at their fingertips and make consumer choices that ultimately will drive a demand for more sustainability in products and services?
Listening to you and hearing, I think you talk about it's a time of systemic change. And I think, yes, it's a time of systemic change. And our perception is really that there is also an awareness that we have this time of systemic change. And you pointed out the different roles. We have the role of the business, the government, and the consumer. We are now looking for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So from your point of view and your experience also within UNEP, what actions should be prioritized to effectively implement these two targets? Particularly if we talk about to influence consumption choices, what would you be or would be your recommendation to member states? Let's start with the member states to strengthen target 15 and target 16. Especially if you talk about this having more regulatory approaches.
I guess the biggest thing for businesses is to be able to mandate having consumer information. So requiring companies basically to provide the information so that consumers have information at their fingertips. Consumers are not going to be able to be informed about the choices they're making unless they have information on the product. Imagine if you have to purchase anything, unless you know how it's produced, what its greenhouse footprint is, what its biodiversity or pollution footprint is, you're simply going to buy based on cost. And so government space in really creating that regulatory space to say you have to provide the information so consumers can be informed is going to be really a critical space.
You're mentioning, I think, and that's the big challenge, is really to provide consumers with the right information. And this could come from organizations like Consumer International, but also, and I think this is also a challenge with Target 50. Now the private sector has been asked to provide this kind of information. And I think maybe also to point out that the Consumer Information Program has developed guidelines to provide products and sustainability information. So there are already very interesting and important tools available. Considering once again the two targets and the question to really include or to develop these legal administrative policies, but also to put burden on the business and also burden at the end on the consumers, because they have to make the right choices. What are the barriers and challenges we have to realize these aspirations?
So you're referring to barriers for businesses?
Barriers for businesses, but I think also barriers for consumers. Okay. You mentioned already in going, maybe we need more kind of labels, we need more clear labels. So what are the challenges we have if we want to have a very sound and ambitious implementation of the two targets?
Okay, let me start maybe with the consumer side, because even if you want to be an informed consumer, the challenge you have is there's so many standards and labels out there. Of course, interesting and good standards, Forest Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council. So you have labels, but the problem is not all products have labels. So it's in a way a niche market that occupies this space. And so you have this confusing array of standards and labels. Two, well, product price. At the end of the day, a majority of customers are looking at product prices. And so they may not have the ability or the financial wherewithal to be able to decide, I'm going to pick this because of sustainability versus something else. So the challenge is that, of course, the cost of a product is also going to be driving consumer behavior. And so in general, just the lack of information, the lack of awareness of what those labels mean is very important when you look at the consumer related barriers. If I then go to business related barriers, so for most businesses, of course, profit is the bottom line. And so if it's going to cost more, that's going to be a serious consideration for the business to be able to take this journey towards sustainability. The second, even if a business wants to do it, they must be able to look at their full supply chain. So where let's say commodities come from, how they're produced, what chemicals were used. If they have a product that has additives and chemical additives in it, what was it that was put in it? Is it harmful? Is it not? What is the greenhouse gas footprint? So there are many different issues that affect let's say the biodiversity and climate footprint of a product, which businesses would need to have access to data across the supply chain, and then of course the resources to be able to go on this journey.
I think we will hear more about the challenges also from our panelists, but just to mention on the consumer side, yes, one thing is the cost of a product. So very often people are looking for what is the cheapest one. And yes, we have a proliferation of labels, but at the other hand, I think like years back, we have harmonized the organic labels. And this was a huge increase of the organic market, where we brought all the organic labels under an EU and now then under an international label. And maybe it's a similar way we have to think about all the others labels we have, how to harmonize and help consumers to make the right choice. And a consumer, and you all know this, it takes them 3 minutes at least, or even less, to make a choice. On the business side, I think, yes, it's a challenge for businesses. But at the other hand, the perception is that businesses are really thinking about more and more where their commodities, where their goods, the fruits, the vegetables, and all the other products are coming from. And it's also a question if you consider the Scope 3 of the climate agenda. I have one more question, and it's a little bit on giving the complexity. What are the strategies offered? Offer the opportunity to overcome them. So what could we do if we want to help consumers and businesses to make the right choices and go in the right direction to promote more sustainable consumption?
I think to have something that is more systemic and not only catering for niche markets, we need a global framework for consumer information, something that sets the standard for how do you look at, let's say if I pick up a product, how do I know what its climate footprint is, its nature and pollution footprint, whether it's safe for my health if I'm going to consume or use it in some way. And all that information can become just unbelievably complex. So I need a simple way to be able to understand it. So a way in which data is created and packaged together, but that requires some kind of a global framework where there is a standard for the way in which businesses have to be able to basically offer information to the consumer. And that will require, at the end of the day, regulation at the country level that requires this standardization of consumer information.
Yes, thank you. I think very inspiring. We need less complex systems, simple communication. And at the end, we need, and that's also important, and it's aligned with the targets, is we need maybe a different way of regulation. Having said this, and I will carry over these questions later on to my panelists. We have a very dedicated and amazing panel today. Let me introduce my panelists. Let me start with Peter Andrews. He's the Director on Sustainable Consumption, Consumer Rights, Innovation and Impact at Consumer International. We have Bettina Hedden-Dankost. She's the Head of Division at the International Nature Conservation at the German Federal Agency of Nature Conservation in Germany. We have Harrison Ojien-Koshwan. He's the Senior Affairs and Engagement Advisor at FSC We have Tai Tarifi. He's the Senior Regional Director of Traffic of Africa. And we have Jan Christian Polania Giese. He is the Senior Project Manager at Adelphi Consultancy, and he is also leading the Sustainable Consumption team at Adelphi and member of the working group in the Consumer Information Program. Let me start with Peter. In your role, leading on consumer rights, innovation and impact at Consumer International, let us know how Consumer International, and maybe you could say one or two more sentences about Consumer International, is supporting consumer rights, and where are the challenges? And you have heard from Sheila what consumers are really, where consumers have problems to make the right choice. So what do consumers need to be empowered and to make the right choice for a sustainable consumption? Over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. Consumers International is the umbrella organisation for consumer advocacy organisations all across the world. We have over 200 members in over 100 countries, campaigning to protect people in the marketplace and empower them. And consumer rights are critical to this debate as they really establish the protections for people as they're purchasing products and services to ensure that they are treated fairly. And empower them to take action such as making informed choices. Now, Consumers International has been around for 60 years, and within that time frame, we have been campaigning for international guidelines on consumer protection, which were adopted in 1985 by the UN, and then updated again in 2015 to incorporate sustainability after more campaigning by consumer groups. These guidelines set out legitimate needs of consumers, which I think is important to this debate, because to empower consumers, you need to give them rights and you need to meet their needs in the marketplace. So for consumers to make educated choices, they need to really understand the environmental, social and economic consequences of their choices. But they also need access to adequate information to enable them to make that choice according to their own individual wishes and needs. And lastly, as enshrined in 2015 in the UN guidelines, the promotion of sustainable consumption patterns. Now, this is really important because we need to move everyone, consumers, businesses, governments, and everyone towards a more sustainable economy, and therefore the more promotion that we can do of this, the more we can buy people into this shift. Now, we did some really exciting research just recently where we uncovered, probably not surprising to most listeners, that the vast majority of consumers support the shift to the green economy, but they really do hold governments, businesses and international institutions to account for that. But as Sheila mentioned, they are feeling the consequences and the impacts of the rising cost of living. So affordability is a critical challenge that many consumers face. So we need to make it easy for people to understand what are the choices they have in the marketplace. We need to make it affordable for them. And we also need to make sure that it is accessible. Now, we found that consumers really like the idea of the green products and services being the default option, so that they don't have to make the 101 decisions at the point of purchase, because it is easy for them to spot what is the right option to make. But not all consumers are the same, and so consumers need to have different motivations to support them in their purchasing practices. They need to understand the positive impacts their actions can take to on the wider climate and wider environment, wider biodiversity system. So tailoring different interventions to different consumer segments, I think, is a real great opportunity to explore further and build upon some of the targets set out in the biodiversity framework.
Thank you. And also, once again, pointing out the easy and affordable information, and also that the consumer has to understand the positive impact of their purchase decision. I think that's something we also have to a little bit build on, maybe later in the discussion. I want to now to ask my question to Bettina. The German Ministry of Environment, co-lead, as already mentioned, of the Consumer Information Program, and the German Federal Agency of Nature Conservation are supporting projects of the Consumer Information Program, which is amazing. Could you tell us more about the projects and also maybe already tackle on the question why this is of relevance for the target 15 and target 16 of the Global Biodiversity Framework? And maybe also, and hopefully short or longer, based on your mention, how can a government policy and initiatives promote sustainable consumption? And I know that the German government is doing a lot in this context. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martina, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to participate also virtually here in this meeting. Actually, I'm standing in for Ulf Jäckel from the German Ministry for Environment, who also serves as the co-chair of the Consumer Information Program. We heard that before. Yes, the projects, about the projects. Since 2017, the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation had the opportunity to support 3 research and development projects that aim to provide information on sustainable consumption for biodiversity. In the first project, we tried to showcase the impact of consumption in the global north on biodiversity in the global south. And we specifically analyzed how the production of cotton, soy, and lithium for manufacturing clothes. In case of clothes, most of parts of it are fast fashion, as we all know. Livestock feed for soy and car batteries for lithium affect biodiversity in the countries of origin. Now, the study also came up with a series of very practical policy and implementation recommendations in general, but also for these 3 products. And I will try to put the link for the study into the chat later. So the study is available and some policy briefs as well. The second project that we carried out was the aim was to support the establishment of Working Group 4 of the Consumer Information Program that was introduced by Anna Karina. And during the project phase, the group developed and disseminated a toolkit for consumer information, which probably Jan Christian, who managed the project or coordinated the project, will maybe talk about later in the context of tools and instruments. Now, the third project, which is started second half last year, looks specifically at another set of products, palm oil, shrimps, and soy again. And we found that analyzing these products and specifying on certain projects really brings about some additional information on impacts on biodiversity. But this project will also look at consumption-related policies, particularly at EU level, like the EU deforestation regulation and their potential impacts on biodiversity also beyond Europe. Now, Martina, you asked me why these projects or how they might be relevant for target 15 and 16. Yes, well, I think they are. They provide evidence, information, and recommendations for policy and action for decision makers, consumers, and producers, business. But and we think we try to link consumption and production in the projects together, and we think this is an important development because bringing the different stakeholders on board is really important to jointly develop solutions. And you managed to do this nicely by concentrating on in this event by concentrating on target 15 and 16. Congratulations for that. Now, the last point, Martina, you mentioned is on on, well, what role government policies and initiatives could play. And definitely governments have an important role to play. In Germany, for example, we launched a national program on sustainable consumption in 2016, and I read that it is the first worldwide program. We also established a Center for Competence on Sustainable Consumption that informs consumers and producers. It offers a platform. We developed regulations, national regulations, but also are working with EU regulations, and we are now expecting a EU dossier and regulation on repairing things, which will be also important in the context of consumption, of course. And governments can provide subsidies, for example, to agriculture. We had a subsidy for e-mobility, which has now been phased out, but definitely encouraged a lot of people to buy e-cars. And sustainable consumption will be part of our NB subs, new NB subs that we are now developing. And we have since 1978, Germany has a label, a certification scheme. It's called the Blue Angel, which some of you might know. It concentrates on six product groups. But most of all, we take it very serious to provide information. And yeah. What other role? Well, apart from this national activities, international cooperation is definitely an important thing. And governments are in the driver's seat regarding negotiations under the conventions. And so we can really have a focus here and have an impact here. And definitely we can foster exchange and mutual learning. And this is very important at the international level as well. And since we are in a globalized world, and we really want to contribute to this. Thanks a lot, Martina. I hope it wasn't too long.
No, totally fine and very interesting. And maybe just to point out two things. One is, once again, the linkage of production and consumption. So that's where we always talk about a systemic change in our food systems. The second thing, and I think looking at Germany, I'm based also in Germany. I followed up the approaches, and Germany was a front runner on this with the Sustainable Consumption Program and all what you have mentioned right now. And I think this is also something to communicate and to show these actional approaches, because we have to get really from this commitment to actions on the ground, and there are a lot of very excellent lessons learned. And one point to pick out, and this is also in the Global Biodiversity Framework, it's Target 18, which is on repurposing and the subsidies. And this is also a very important topic. Do we have the right subsidies on to safeguard and to reduce our biodiversity loss? Probably could be a topic for another full hour or longer session, or even more. Having said this, I want to get to my next panelist, to Harrison. We heard from Sheila already and the previous speaker the importance of eco-labels. Also the ask to have more harmonized maybe eco-labels. And what I want to hear a little bit from you in your role with FSC International, what is the role and I think the importance of certification and responsible sourcing in biodiversity conservation? And how could certification and the questions we have in the two targets support the implementation of Target 15, which is calling, and just to emphasize, on regularly monitor, assess, and transparently disclose the risk, dependency, and impact of biodiversity for businesses. So based on your FSC experience, listening to you now.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, let me start by saying that the Forest Stewardship Council is, I think, the most trusted label as a sustainable forestry solution globally. And having said that, we have a standard that deals with forest management and another standard on products from the forest resources. And then in addition to that, we do have a standard on basically trying to show and verify the impacts of forest management or certification on biodiversity, among other things. So there's the link between the FSC certification standard and biodiversity is very direct in the sense that traditionally we had the forest management standard. And then we have the chain of custody standard, which deals with products and services from the forest sector, which are in the market. And about 5-6 years ago, we added what we call ecosystem services procedure. We now call it the verified impacts of certification. And that procedure verifies how the management of a certified area affects biodiversity in its entirety, affects water, affects tourism, and things and such matters. So right now we have this new addition to our 2 traditional standards to deal with that. So I would say in a succinct way that our forest management standard, our chain of custody standard, and our verified impacts supports ethical sourcing of forest products. Products from certified forests have a worldly or a globally recognized sustainability sticker to them. And we call it responsible or ethical sourcing. And the standard itself also incentivizes sustainable consumption to the extent that companies that deal in recycled products can get a certification attached to that, because the recycling of products which have been used already is basically a way of reducing pressure on consumption and unnecessary pressure on land to grow more if you can recycle. And it also, our standard, for example, in industrial plantations where you have large plantations that require fertilizers and chemicals, we have got very strict indicators against the use of unsafe chemicals into the system, because most of these forest ecosystems also are around watersheds or water catchment areas. And I've had personal experience of dealing with this sort of thing in industry some years back. And we also recognize within forest management units which are certified. For example, in the Republic of Congo, we have got a 2 million hectare concession. And in that concession, we are very strict about the management of high conservation values in those concessions. And so our high conservation value standard, indicators within our certification standard directly speaks to biodiversity. And we have shown through verified data that in actual fact, the level of protection of biodiversity in those certified areas actually outstrips the officially managed national parks next to those concessions. So our standard has traditionally supported conservation. The last thing I want to say, so it's important for us to say that our forest management standard is independently verified by independent auditing companies, not FSC. So when we put a certificate to it, it is trusted because of that. Secondly, our COC standard, our chain of custody standard, looks at the supply chain and looks at whether there's any supply chain integrity issues which need to be corrected. that is also independently certified, verified. Thirdly, our new ecosystem services procedure, or the verified impacts of forest certification, is directly contributing both nationally and globally to biodiversity conservation. To the targets, so all those things, if you look at them carefully, they address target 10. And not only target 10, we also address target 15, which we have mentioned, and 2 others. But the most important one is we directly contribute to target 10 and goal B and target 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have to say that the whole FSC is a success story. I think to remember it started in 1994, also at that time, with huge support from WWF, and listening now about this. Also, it was always a standard would get further developed. Like you mentioned, this verified impacts on certification, where you really could monitor or verify the effects on biodiversity, the high conservation value areas, which is really 100% linked to biodiversity. And I totally agree that it is target 10, target 15, and I also see the target 2 on restoration partly important for FSC, and just also to mention in this context the EU deforestation regulation, where probably hopefully FSC will play an important role. So very exciting to listen to you and to hear the further development of the FSC standard. I come now to Jan Christian. Jan Christian, you are involved in the project which is called BioTrade, which concentrates on 4 value chain: coca in Peru, handicraft products in the Brazilian Amazon, fish in the Mediterranean region, and gold mine in Ghana. Very difficult topics, by the way. And this project aims to identify leverage points and develop tools for policymakers and consumers. Could you tell us, first of all, maybe a little bit about the project, and also about the tools or the resources, and maybe name some positive examples on the impact of sustainable consumption and biodiversity? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Martina, for the nice introduction. And also, thanks a lot for the organizers for having me here. And it's great to be on a panel with such gifted people. Also those including that are here online. And also thanks for having us here. BioTrade, just so you know what kind of project it is. It's a research and implementation project funded by the EU. It's a Horizon Europe project. And I will not go too much into detail into all the different work packages. And I would like to highlight the Ghana case study, which is on gold. And yeah, indeed, we have picked difficult topics here. Let's do this challenge together. Just to get you on board. So for Ghana, gold is an important resource. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest exporter of gold in Africa. And a significant part of the gold is extracted in artisanal small-scale mining sites, so about 30%, which is a huge number. So those partly operate in informal contexts, so beyond environmental regulation. And during the extraction process, cyanides are released to the environment, and the landscape is perforated with little holes everywhere, which form of kind of death traps for animals, but also for people. The communities that are living there, they are aware of those hazards. They also see connection between the resilience of the habitats and the species living there, or the nature, and the damage that is done to, also with regards to climate change. So the perception is there, but the actions are perceived like not sufficient or ineffective. There's a lot of mistrust among the communities there against activities or initiatives that come from different institutions. And also the miners there, they kind of feel disconnected from the supply chain. But still, ASM mining, so artisanal mining, it's an important source of income. So it's important for the communities there. So in general, we have like 3 challenges there. We have the biodiversity loss, we have the social impacts, which are negative, but are also positive partly. And then we have kind of this communication breach. So what can we do about this? To kind of stay focused, we apply the leverage points for transformative change framework, which was developed by Donella Meadows and has also been tailored to the biodiversity context in the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Ecosystem Services. And we use this kind of a navigator to also look into initiatives and activities and measures that are actually kind of leading towards a transformative change. So let's pick one of the leverage points, one of the deep leverage points, which is create visions of a good life. And to our gold context, this is to change consumer preferences and values towards more sustainable and ethical choices, such as reducing demand for gold or choosing recycled or certified gold in terms of jewelry, but also like when the gold is part of the product. So what tools or measures do we already have at hand? Yeah, Martina mentioned that we will develop tools during the project. So this is still in the process. We're going for serious games, for instance, also for alternative scenarios and visions. But we also want to build on the available tools already. Bettina already mentioned the biodiversity communication toolkit. So there we already have guidance that can support businesses in kind of communicating the biodiversity impact that consumption patterns may have. So make consumers aware about their impact. And of course, we also recommend on those guidance to include a call to action. So to kind of produce this systemic change in a way, how products that contain gold are consumed. And then there's also the fair trade label for gold. So this label in that context works with artisanal miners and cooperatives. And besides increasing their income, they also work on reducing the release of harmful substances to the environment. And they are also reconnecting the miners with the rest of the supply chain up to the consumers. Those are voluntary actions that I've just described, or kind of, and are also implemented by companies like the Fairphone, for instance, which use fair trade certified gold. And when looking at the circularity of gold, Dell, for instance, introduced the Reconnect program, which is a take-back system, and they use the gold that they kind of retrieve from this take-back system for new computers. But I think this is not enough. So this is mainly voluntary, and as Martina mentioned in the beginning, like we have to look into how we can actually implement and operationalize target 15 and 16. And I think much more action is needed, and how Johan Rockström rightfully accentuated today in the meeting here at ONEA at the Science, Business and Policy Forum. Okay, it's time for delivery. We have the political arenas, we have the techniques, but now it's about implementing it and deliver. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and also thanks for the call. And I could only support this, that it's time for delivery. We have amazing commitments, but now we really have to implement these commitments. And once again, I think it's important also to point it out that target 15 and 16 is not only on what you consume every day, as what we eat, but also it's about forest products. It's about gold, yeah, to help consumers to make the right choices. And also one of the part is handicraft. So it's really a very and a very broad, and I think a very ambitious target. And having said this, it's ambition, and it's something where we all have now been asked to think about what and how this target should really look like. There is a discussion about monitoring, about indicator, and we are on the way to the COP16 in October in Colombia and Cali. And beside the CBD Secretariat and the parties who are thinking about the implementation, it's also the governments at national level who have been asked to now amend their nationally biodiversity strategy and action plan. So, and listening to you, I was questioning what are really the gaps and challenges. And Sheila already mentioned some of the challenges we have to implement this. And what would be your recommendation you would like to give to decision makers who are now sitting, discussing the next SAPSA in Nairobi in May? And what would you like to see to be strengthened or to improved? And I go again around the table, starting with Peter from Consumer International. Sorry, I have forgot. Okay, sorry. We have so many panelists, and I've got really a very important one. It's Tai Tarefi. Tai, sorry for this.
Yeah, it's all right.
I want to ask you, you have a very long experience with multilateral environmental agreements. So what resources, capacity, billing opportunities are there to promote sustainable consumption and biodiversity, and also with traffic? What is the linkage of traffic, and how is traffic promoting sustainable consumption?
Thank you very much. Let me just start with the last question first. The idea of promoting and supporting legal, sustainable, and safe consumption of biodiversity is the raison d'etre of traffic. That's what traffic is about. While at the same time fighting against illegal, unsustainable, and unsafe trade. So that, in that sense, I want to go back to what my friend Dr. Kojoam said about FSC. So there is another dimension to the use of biodiversity, which is a community-oriented, non-timber, plant-based use for foods, medicinal, fragrance. This is a big industry, close to 3.9 billion at the last count, but I'm not even up to date with that one. Recognizing, and this is what actually supports local communities. So in that sense, traffic developed a certification scheme, again, independently verified, fair trade, ecologically sustainable, with sufficient safeguards against child labor, a certification scheme called Fair Wild. Now, to implement this certification scheme, it developed additional documents, like one called Wild at Home. This is to support sustainable harvest, use, and consumption. Another one is Wild Check, which is assess risks, opportunities of trade in wild plants ingredients. And these are in use. But what is really important, I think the colleagues brought out about the importance of consumers having sufficient information. But I would suggest that it's not enough to have sufficient information. We have to find a way to shift consumers towards sustainable. Not all consumers are of the same kind. And so, recognizing that, traffic developed a series of guidelines, working with the World Bank in particular and GF. One is a behavior change for biodiversity. The other one is behavior change for wildlife conservation. And the other one is demand reduction, change communication. All this to say that the idea then is to drive the use of these plants toward sustainable, credible, independently verified use, such that communities benefit from biodiversity. And so in addition to targets 15 and 16, I think we should consider target 5. Mm-hmm. Target 5 is about sustainable use. It's directly about biodiversity. So that and that target is what links communities to the implementation of the CBD. If target 5 and target 9 getting benefits for communities, credible and fair benefit for communities is embedded, then those communities become the custodians of the biodiversity system. If they are left out of the system, then it becomes a struggle. This is sort of what has happened in the past. So that is where I come from in the sense of what is traffic doing and how do you drive legal, sustainable, and a safe trade. Now, what in terms of what would happen and what would be the most important thing, the GBF is probably one of the most comprehensive documents that has ever been produced, honestly. If you compare it to the IG targets, the IG targets were lacking indicators. They didn't consider means of implementation. At least for the first time, under C on means of implementation, and indicators are not all there. And traffic is working very hard with a big consortium on target 5 to develop the indicator, especially the airline indicator. And I can mention that consortium is called Collaborative Partnership for Wildlife, which brings together all the international conservation NGOs and the MEA secretariats, CITES, CBD, CMS. And we take different responsibilities on consortium to actually strengthen the implementation of the GBF. So the GBF is a good one. It has already factored in the need for means of implementation, for example, in terms of advanced financing to catalyze the process. You're probably aware now that UNEP and UNDP have got early action funding from GF, and they're supporting governments in the review of the NBSAPs. And then credit to the German government, there is another one coming on the back of that called the Accelerator Program. So at least for once, I know we've lost quite a number of years in the negotiation, but there is quite a bit of momentum in fast-tracking the implementation of the GBF, and provided that the countries take advantage of this opportunity, they are required to report at COP16 on the state of the NBSAP revision, and they have these facilities to support them. So I would say the prospects are good. How that is done, we have some concerns. So you have 23 global targets. Countries pick targets at their discretion within their circumstances. There is a big worry that some of these targets may get diluted when they are considered within National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Some of them get dropped. But the GBF is a whole package. You have to really basically take all of that together in order to deliver. So our role, all of us, is really to work with governments to make them appreciate that the GBF calls for a whole of society, all of the government approach, and that they should consider all the 23 targets within their context, but not really dilute them. Thank you.
Thank you. And also really, once again, explaining for a while, I think it's a very, very important standard, and the connection and to integrate the communities. We will not be successful if we don't do this. And I'm very, very grateful that you mentioned this. And also, this is you say it's a whole package, it's a whole of society approach. And it shows again that it's not only target 15 and 16, it's a number of other targets in which we could really integrate these food system approaches from the production up to the consumption. And this also connects then again to Fair Wild and target 5 and target 9. And now we have about short, let's say 5 to 7 minutes, and I want to get a very short answer from each of you, and I will a little bit combine 2 questions I had. One is on the decisions or the recommendations you would like to give to those who are sitting at the government and have to make the decisions now on the next steps for the implementation, but also a little bit to listen how your organization will contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. I start again with Peter now.
Great, yes, thank you. And it's been a brilliant discussion so far today. So thank you so much to all the other speakers. From our perspective, we need to get green products being accessible, affordable, and comparable. So that will require standardization of the mechanisms businesses use to assess and disclose impacts. It requires standardization of the product and services information that consumers are receiving to make sure that they can truly compare different products. It also requires support for those who may have limited capacity to implement certain measures, whether they be countries, whether they be small to medium-sized businesses. And it also requires real discussion on what does consumption look like within planetary boundaries that supports people's well-being. Now, this year we've got the climate COP, the plastics treaty negotiations, the biodiversity COP. Often the demand side transformation or the consumption side of these debates is overlooked. So it's brilliant to see what's happening in this biodiversity framework. But what an opportunity this year presents to really step back and think about the consumption angle to all of these different siloed negotiations that are happening, and really put the consumer at the heart, and how we can support and empower the consumer to take action. So what will we do as Consumers International? Well, we will keep up the pressure for robust targets in each of these different negotiations that are happening. Through the Consumer Information Programme, we're championing the work of Working Group 4 on biodiversity, the additional work to advance the use of eco-labels in public procurement in 5 countries across the world, and really support in any other way we can do to ensure that we have a really great outcome for the planet and for people everywhere.
Thank you, very encouraging. I asked the same question to Bettina, more now from a government perspective.
Thank you. Yes, I think I'm the only one who really takes the government perspective. And yeah, gaps, challenges, recommendations concerning targets 15 and 16. Well, if we look at the gaps, or if I looked at the target again, I missed a little bit the promotion of innovations, inviting business to support innovations, and maybe from the government side also to provide incentives for innovative work. The challenges here for government on target 15 is, and if we look at the formulation, take legal, administrative or policy measures to encourage and enable business, etc. It's not an easy task for government to develop the measures, to enforce the measures especially. So that's going to be a huge challenge, and I think Sheila had pointed to that issue as well. So now, if we look at target 16, part of it refers to reduce food waste. Yes, I missed a little bit. I think we need an action plan on that. And so that would really help. So maybe something for COP16 to look at. But also we need to convince people that reduction of waste is important from the consumers, from the government side. So here consumer information comes in again as a very crucial point. Last not least, any recommendations? Well, I think, and I mentioned it before, and Martina also mentioned it, that linking stakeholders is really crucial in this whole debate, and encouraging youth is an important point from our understanding. Now, also the use of social media, innovative means for information sharing should really looked at in future. And from one of our projects, we found that a focus on high impact sectors is extremely relevant. For example, the food systems or the agricultural sectors. So let's try to focus a bit. And we saw that a good example for linking stakeholders and is the initiative Make It Mandatory. That came up by companies at COP15 to demand consistent regulations from governments. So that shows how strong the demand is from business and the need to get the involvement of governments concerning regulations. Last not least, let's stay engaged. That's going to be my recommendation for all of us. And that's important. It's an important topic. It will make a change if we go ahead. So let's try to keep engaged, stay engaged.
Thanks a lot. And also, I think it's important, and maybe it was a little bit not in the focus, to encourage use. I think to encourage use to really and give the information with the right media to young people. I will now, Harrison, your advice.
Thank you very much indeed. From an FSC perspective, I would just like to say that we are in the countries in which we operate because we have already consulted with those governments and they've got standards in those countries that govern the certification process itself. Having said that, what it means is that government policy is very important for our work. So I would just like to make an appeal to the governments to support us from the policy to the implementation, to enlarge, or should I say, to expand the uptake certification beyond timber concessions, for example. And that is where our work on ecosystem services, on verified impacts of certification comes in. Last year, we had the pleasure of certifying a protected area, 3 protected areas in Uganda. These are iconic protected areas, some of which have mountain gorillas and so on. This park doesn't have any timber to be harvested. What we are trying to promote is that we should expand certification beyond timber harvesting concessions. And there are lots of countries in the world, Africa, for example, in the Congo Basin, which have a network of protected areas that if they could be certified alongside the timber concessions, they will create landscapes where economic activity with tangible products like wood sits alongside ecosystem services. Now, the challenge there is an opportunity cost to be paid for having, should I say, certification of certain areas that restricts use. So when countries generate ecosystem services by protecting and certifying, having certified management standards and results, do we help them? How do we help them defray the costs of protection of huge areas in the landscape setting? And that brings us to the question of, is there a growing market that can consume verified ecosystem service claims? That is one challenge that we see happening, that we can create those products, but there's a very limited market at the moment to consume them. What my friend Taeta Ferry said is, how do communities get the incentives to be partners in conservation? Sometimes they do when we give them incentives, both nationally and internationally. So my challenge to the world is, how do we incentivize local communities living adjacent to forests, which we want to certify and protect? They need to get some incentive systems. That's the second thing. I would also like to say that FSC, and you mentioned the European Union deforestation regulations. Those who carry our certificates, and now some of them are getting worried about the EU deforestation regulations. My solace to them is that if you meet the FM, if you have got an FM or a forest management certificate or a chain of custody certificate, it's not an incredibly huge hurdle to comply with the EU DR law. And we are now working on a product that will work with which will help our certificate holders to meet the EU regulations on deforestation.
That's very interesting, yeah.
And I think this is something that we would like to say. and the product will soon be out. And of course, in addition to that, we are coming up with the restoration toolbox, which will link forest management in a restoration context into certification.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have to look at the time. We always say in these discussions, we are running out of time. It's so fruitful. I would like now to ask Tai the same questions on the challenges, gaps, very short, and also how traffic is contributing or might contribute. You mentioned already a lot in your
Yeah,
first
thank you.
statement.
I'll be very brief. Thank
Yes.
you. In terms of recommendation to governments, the idea there is they should really try to create incentives for businesses to shift, and then the market and like Consumer International, for example, should use its purchasing power to actually put pressure on governments. They have big membership. So that is what my recommendation is. It's wanting to have laws. There are many laws, we have them, they don't get implemented, but really to create a bit of incentive for some businesses to become front runners on the certification or sustainability path. And then that, if they get differentiated at the consumer end, they start picking up momentum. That would be my recommendation. What do we do on GF? We are a member of what's called the NBSAP Forum, which is a technical body that helps think through the implementation of the GBF. We are working directly on Target 5 with various colleagues and organizations to develop the indicators. And we are supporting governments at the national level in their consultation process. The national consultation process is the first step in the revision and updating of the NBSAPs. And because of the requirement of a whole of society, whole of government approach, they have to have good consultation process, especially bringing in local communities, IPLCs, and civil society organizations. So we have about 7 countries and across Africa we're working in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, I want to ask Jan Christian on a very short input, and then we will have Bianca Brazil later on from the UNCBD. But Jan Christian, first to you, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I will also make it really brief. So when we look at the project that I've just presented, so we will build capacities among the producers to kind of implement the measures that we have jointly identified. So it's I think it's a valid point to really work with the communities on the ground, also to work on solutions. Then what I also think is really important, besides the capacity building, is to support innovative, eco-inclusive or nature-inclusive business models, to provide the financing for them. And for instance, some colleagues of mine, they are working on biodiversity accelerator finance models. So where they support like micro enterprises to kick off with nature-inclusive business models, and kind of provide them coaching and also financial support, like when they take off. Then when we look at the European situation, I think it's key that the directive for green claims is finalized and then also approved, so that we have kind of this guidance to develop communication in a way that where it is substantiated and reliable and also accessible. So this is what we have for Europe and for the EU, and for the global, we have the guidelines for providing product sustainability information, which was already mentioned today. And I would support Sheila to kind of put this on a next level. So she didn't say it in a way, but she said like we need a global framework, and so to kind of provide the support and turn it into UNEP guidelines or even like UN guidance. And then last but not least, and I think this is a really a hard nut to crack, is to kind of not look only into biodiversity policies, but take a step back and look into, aligned policies, because what we need is consistent policies. Otherwise, we cannot kind of change the behavior of people when they, on the one side, are informed to buy nature-friendly products, which might be even more expensive, and on the other hand, they see that fossil fuels are still subsidized. So why is that happening? And I think this really confuses them. So what we need is to phase out environmentally harmful subsidies. Otherwise, I think we will not get this transformative change, and also this transformative change within the minds of consumers.
Thank you. Thank you, especially for your last remark on the subsidies. I think that's another very important topic. I would like to all the panelists, I would like to Sheila to have this very fruitful and inspiring discussion. And I'm very happy now. I'm very happy now to introduce. Now we have an echo here. Our last speaker, which is Bianca Brazil. She's the program manager on business engagement at the UN Biodiversity, at the UN Secretariat. And she's dealing also with these targets. And Bianca, what you have listened, we have made a lot of recommendations, discussions. Would be nice a little bit to hear from you sitting really in the center of everything. Does it help you? What are the recommendations also from your side to us, but also to our audience who's listening to us? Over to you.
Thank you, Martina, and thank you everyone for the discussion and for the opportunity to join you today. The thing with these events and these dialogues is that we learn a lot. And as the process started back in 2019, so many of these discussions have been raising not only the bar, but also the collaboration and the level of participation of so many different organizations. I think I want to thank everyone for these opportunities. We all know that the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework was a milestone, and the inclusion of a target focusing on sustainable consumption only indicates how this is critical for the global community. And I think colleagues here have shared inputs on how these things are connected. So it's not just about sustainable consumption, but there is a role to be played on the fiscal side of things into looking into the subsidies and to reframing subsidies in a way that they actually subsidize a positive action rather than the other way around. The adoption of the framework was very, very important and significant, but it was the first step, as we all know, into a journey towards a successful implementation. So what we're now witnessing is the work unfolding. So we have governments and a number of parties have already updated their NBSAPs, their National Biodiversity Action Plans, in order to address these 4 global goals and targets, with many more expected to do so ahead of COP16, which will take place in October in Cali, Colombia. This will have also to be reflected into national targets and the supporting legal frameworks required. So there is a lot of work from the side of the governments to make sure that these targets are met in a timely fashion, because our deadline is 2030, the first deadline is 2030. But the truth is that implementation will only be effective and successful if we are able to scale up these different initiatives and efforts, but most of all, if we're able to scale up collaboration and ambition. Governments will not be able to solve this puzzle alone, and it is very encouraging to see, civil society, the UN system, private sector, everyone coming together and doing their bit in order to scale up and to, as a collective, hopefully achieve and deliver on all these targets and goals. From the Secretariat side, I'm very excited to share that we are in full planning process for COP16. I envision that there will be plenty of opportunities to discuss more in detail and in-depth issues related to sustainable consumption, but also sustainable production. The role of business and financial sectors, food systems, which are so interlinked with sustainable consumption. The target also talks about having food waste, so we need to look into that very closely as well. We have dedicated targets on pollution, so we'll need to look into that. Plastic pollution is not singled out, but is emphasized. And we need to also draw a plan on that. And sustainable consumption is one of the connecting points of all of these targets and all of these discussions. So I want to leave an invitation open here to all my colleagues that were speaking before me to participate of COP16. We can look into ways in which we can scale collaboration. We will have an opportunity in the Business and Biodiversity Forum that will be organized, and many other parallel dialogues that we are planning on promoting, to shed a light into sustainable consumption through the lens of food systems, through the lens of the sustainable consumption as a whole, how this can affect the other targets and all that. So I want to leave the invitation open. I look forward to welcome you to Colombia, all of you who will be able to join us, and of course exploring synergies and means of collaboration between now and then. So thank you so much, Martina. I hope I didn't overextend my time.
No, thank you, Bianca. And it's encouraging also to hear from you that we all are on this journey now. And it's nice to see everybody around the table, to see the participants. And please excuse that we don't have time for answer any of the questions which have been in the chat. But we are on this journey, and we only will be successful if we continue this journey together. And also, I think it's important really to integrate a food system approach in all the targets. And it goes beyond target 15 and target 16. And we have to tackle, as I mentioned at the beginning, the production, the supply chain, food loss and waste, and the consumption. And I also want to encourage you, if you want to hear more and to learn more also, and to get more engaged, to become a partner of the One Planet Network, the Consumer Information Program. You have heard that the Consumer Information Program will give a lot of support with all the partners, with the co-leads who are around here, who have participated in this session, and happy to see you or discuss with you all on the way to COP16 in Cali in Colombia, and also participate in all the interim steps which are on the way now over the next 6 months. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining, and I wish you all a nice day, evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.